First, Dmitry Peskov, he's a Kremlin spokesperson, saying, quote, and this makes perfect sense. NATO is de facto involved in this war. NATO is providing direct and indirect support for the Kyiv regime. It can be said with absolute certainty NATO is fighting against Russia. Well, my reaction to that was to write no excrement next to it. We've been given missiles and aid and arms and everything but boots on the ground to this country going on 4 years now. So no surprise there, but pivoting over, we have comments from a guy I know you know, Security Council Deputy Chairman Dmitry Medvedev, who issued a warning to the Western Military Alliance that if NATO countries begin shooting down Russian drones over Ukraine, this will put Moscow at war with NATO. That's a shot over the bow. So I guess we shoot them down before they get into Ukrainian airspace, like over Poland.
Yeah, listen, this is getting to a really troubling situation here, because you're getting a lot more cocksure, boisterous comments from NATO countries. I mean, quite a number of the military personnel, NATO specific, national leaders in various of the NATO countries, and they're making these kind of comments here. And so now Russia's making their own boisterous and cocksure comments in the other direction. And listen, I mean, this is a little bit more concerning than some of the other statements that Dmitry Medvedev has made over the years, because he's made a lot of hyperbolic comments and et cetera, over the top emotions. But this one seems to be pretty specific. If you shoot down our weapons and drones and whatever over Ukraine airspace, meaning in the combat zone, then we're going to take action accordingly. And if we do that, and there is talk of doing it, that's part of the thing here. This is not just an isolation. There has been some talk of doing that among the NATO members. And you could get yourself possibly in a situation where we actually have an armed engagement. Now, this whole thing, all the commentary here is about this batch of allegedly 19 drones, Russian drones that went into Polish airspace. Now, the best example we can give right now of what actually happened, the most likely course, is that Ukrainian electronic warfare signals successfully got them diverted from going into their country, and they just kept on a straight line, which means they didn't turn on their normal path into Ukraine. They just kept going. But now then we're trying to use that as justification for potentially engaging in an armed conflict with Russia. This is nonsense. This is insane. And we need to get it checked.
And, I suppose one may argue, wait a second, we didn't threaten China with war when they sent an airship over our country and we let it invade our airspace across the entire landscape of the United States of America, only to shoot it down in international waters in the Atlantic. I mean, airspace gets invaded all the time. We hear about it up in Alaska with the Russians doing that. I guess this airspace invasion thing seems to be secondary to the broader problem we've got here. What I see happening, if Russia is being so boisterous and threatening the NATO countries, aren't we really looking at a potential World War III here? Because China is going to join at the hips with Russia in its defense, because they're certainly not our side or not on the Western side of the equation. Maybe North Korea would join into the fun. This isn't just Russia making the threat, is it? Practically speaking?
I think that probably, my guess is that if there was a war started because of something like this, where we had an air no-fly zone, because Poland, by the way, expressly called for, a no-fly zone, specifically called for it. They did in the early in the war, and it got knocked down by the Biden administration because they didn't want to get into a war.
Right.
But now they're talking about it. See, if that happened, my guess is China would initially kind of stay on the sideline, because they don't want to get into a war. They don't want to draw a war on themselves. They got a lot of things going on themselves, but they might support Russia more. But I think North Korea might actually send large numbers of troops if it got into something like that, for various reasons. But Russia by itself would be able to handle whatever that's happened there. And I'm just telling you, the biggest Achilles heel we have that no one wants to pay attention to is that we don't have the industrial capacity to sustain a war against Russia. And that, God help us, as long as it stayed conventional and didn't go nuclear. This is a fool's errand of the highest order, and we are playing with literal fire here.
Well, and it's only one conflict in the world. If we can't sustain a war against one of the bigger superpowers, not the biggest, we know that's China, then we can't really defend ourselves.
That's exactly the point. I keep screaming this all the time when people talk about, well, we should fight China over Taiwan, for example. And I'm like, have you looked at any of the actual computer scenarios and any of the war games that we've done? Every single one of them correctly point out that we would run out of offensive and defensive missiles within a matter of weeks, because we've given so many away to all these other countries, Israel, Ukraine, firing them in the Red Sea, etc. And now possibly even in Venezuela. We can probably talk about that another day. But we don't have the industrial capacity to replace what we've already given away. It would take years, like 4 or 5 years to do once these other ones stop. And so you can't get into a situation where you need these weapons to defend yourself or engage in offensive operations. They simply don't exist. But it's like our political leaders, and I'm not just talking about the U.S., I'm talking about Poland and Germany and France. I mean, they're all just like war rabid right now.
Well, in the face of the reality that you just spoke of, I mean, you and I have talked about the perpetual living in a state of denial by all these leaders. Nothing has changed in our conversations. They still don't quite get it. I mean, I wish more people were presented with the stark statement that you just made about the finite supply of U.S. military arms, that we would be in a position where we couldn't even defend ourselves in a protracted war, that more leaders had to address that existential reality and answer to it and respond on some coherent level about how they think we can continue this Ukraine situation without the whole thing coming unglued and us ending up in this massive conflict. I don't know. It just bothers me that they keep uttering the same things over and over again. Donald Trump, just the other day, we're going to put more sanctions on you, NATO countries, stop buying Russian oil. And if that happens, we'll have some great success. And if you don't stop buying Russian oil, I'm going to sanction you, NATO countries. I mean, is he threatening NATO? I mean, I'm not quite sure what game plan he's got, but the question is he issuing an ultimatum to persuade Europe, or maybe an excuse for him to keep kicking the can down the road, which he seems to want to do each and every week? I'm lost, Daniel.
Yeah, that's my best reading of it as well, because this was addressed to NATO and the world. It wasn't even addressed to Russia. It wasn't addressed to Ukraine, the two principals in the war. It was addressed to NATO and the world, meaning the potential targets of sanctions and the secondary tariffs, etc. And listen, there is zero chance that if all these countries did what Trump, quote, told them to do, which he said later in that same letter of NATO, it would not stop the war, because Russia is built to sustain that kind of economic pressure. They have made themselves almost sanction proof. And these other countries, if really with the weakening European economy, you want them to slash 100% tariff on China, for crying out loud? I mean, they couldn't sustain that. And then just the immediate cutoff, and it's around 15-20% oil. If they just immediately cut that off, it would be a huge problem for their economies. Just to how are they going to power themselves? Some countries in Europe are more than others, but it would be a huge shock to their system to just suddenly cut it off. They can't do that, or they would have done it already. So it's an impossible ask, and even if they did, it wouldn't work. So you got to circle back again. Why issue the ultimatum?
And and I guess suppose when does the line in the sand expiration date, Daniel? I mean, did he say within a certain time frame you need to act now? Because Wall Street Journal was suggesting that there would be bipartisan support for a sanctions bill along the lines of sanctioning NATO if they continue to buy Russian oil in the stopgap CR for continuing funding this month. In other words, you have to swallow it. We're going to sanction our NATO allies in order to bring about this result. If Congress acts, they can do that subject to a presidential veto. But since it's what Donald Trump apparently wants, I can see it going through.
Right. Yeah. And Brian, I'm almost speechless. What are we doing? I mean, there's no logic and rational thought behind this. It's just a power play. I don't know, to get my way. That's how it feels. I just want submission to my way, however defined. And yet you see that the reality and the consequence of that action can be detrimental to our interest in almost any one of the categories you look at. And I just don't understand this. It's just not the world that I used to think was the one that was real in our country.
Right. And this isn't like Vietnam where we have boots on the ground, an alleged, mission to accomplish This is Ukraine kind of on its own, certainly with support of NATO countries and some weapons and military armaments and things that we're handing along to them. But they got overwhelmed or are getting overwhelmed. It seems like the writing's on the wall, the inevitable on this military victory for Russia by an overwhelming invasive force with and against a country that we have no defense obligation with. Do you think if this was some remote African country that we would have a worry or concern in the world if some other larger country took it over? Yeah, whatever. It's the world. I mean, there are wars fought all the time we're not involved with. There are victors and there are losers. And, in this particular case, sorry, sucks to be you, Ukraine, but you couldn't fight off the big evil bad guy. And we don't have a vested interest in helping you accomplish a victory.
Yeah, we don't. And by the way, I want to point out something else. I just talked about the absence of the industrial base that we have to sustain the kind of an attritional war that's going on between Russia and Ukraine. Russia does. China does. They learned the lesson of this. Actually, before they had already come to conclusions, but they also have a substantial defense industrial base that can just produce everything that they need. So our two biggest potential adversaries have the industrial capacity to sustain a long conventional war, and we don't. That alone should cause us to say, whoa, hold on, stop the train here. Let's don't run off the track. But instead, it's like that's oblivious and they keep plunging forward. God help us if we roll over that out bridge.
Yeah, and no fan of the military-industrial complex am I, but you've got to be able to defend yourself. It's one of the reasons I'm a Second Amendment believer. Keep and bear arms. You don't want to have to use them, but you want them there in case. We should have them there in case for the protection of our own interest and our own soil.
I'm not a big fan of saying, hey, let's ramp up to like World War II level capacity so that we can defend ourselves, because then there's too much risk to use it. But what I would say is that if you're not going to do that, then shut your mouth, man. Don't write checks that our country can't cash that could get us killed. That's where we're going down to.
Well, and hope that maybe that rhetoric that you just spoke of will behind the scenes say, hey, we got a problem. We woke up to the challenge we face. We can only produce 500 Patriot missiles annually. We can't keep up with the demand and we can't protect ourselves. So maybe behind the scenes, they'll be able to ramp up production to that comfortable level about which you speak, Daniel, before something really bad happens.
Yeah, I'm the biggest advocate for peace through strength. Yeah. Peace, defending our country and having the capacity. That's part of deterrence, so that a country knows that, man, if we mess with the U.S., they can sustain this. If we can't, then the deterrent level goes way down. So I think we need a stronger capability, but only in conjunction with wise policy, or we have the trouble we have right now.
Daniel Davis, wish we could solve the problems of the world. Sadly, we can identify them really well. The solutions struggle.